I went to a dinner at my daughter's house and, upon arriving, overheard my son-in-law whispering to her, "Ugh, that useless old man is here." I pretended not to hear and kept my composure all night. At the end of the dinner, I took some papers out of my jacket, slowly tore them in front of them, and left without saying a word. Later, my daughter called me crying, "Dad, for God's sake, what were those papers?" The lesson I gave that night was unforgettable. My name is Arthur. I'm 68 years old, and until that Thursday afternoon, I believed I had built a life founded on two solid pillars: respect and discretion. I had always prided myself on a quiet elegance, not of expensive fabrics, but of posture, of the restrained gesture, of the considered word. My generosity followed the same path, a quiet undercurrent that nourished the roots of those I loved without ever overflowing to the surface in search of applause. However, my greatest virtue had also always been my greatest weakness, an almost painful sensitivity to words, which allowed me to read between the lines of a conversation, but also made every criticism a deep wound. And the wound that opened that day was the most devastating of all. I was in the polished hallway of my daughter Lucy's apartment building on my way to our weekly dinner. The aroma of basil and garlic escaped from under the door, a promise of warmth and familiarity that, for an instant, warmed my chest. I rang the doorbell, adjusting the collar of my shirt, and it was in that brief moment of waiting that the world as I knew it collapsed. "Ugh! The useless old man is here. He's insufferable, always hovering." The voice was unmistakable. It was Mark, my son-in-law. The words, muffled by the wood of the door, pierced through it with the precision of a scalpel, embedding themselves directly in my heart. The air left my lungs. I felt the blood run cold in my veins, and the once welcoming hallway seemed to stretch, the walls distorting as if in a nightmare. Useless. Insufferable. Each syllable echoed in my mind, multiplying, layering over the months of small signs I had stubbornly ignored, the impatient glances when I took too long to tell a story, the hurried greetings, the way he always seemed too busy for a conversation. I had justified it all as work fatigue, the stress of modern life. What a fool I'd been. That wasn't indifference. It was contempt, a deep, cutting contempt. The door swung open and Mark's face appeared, adorned with the falsest of smiles. "Arthur, so glad you made it," he exclaimed, his forced cordiality sounding like an insult. Behind him, my Lucy, my most precious thing, was smiling, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. I stepped inside, feeling like an actor in a macabre play, each step a monumental effort to maintain my composure. The dinner was silent torture. I watched the man who hated my presence sit at the table I helped buy, eating the food I taught my daughter to prepare, while she, my Lucy, laughed and talked about her plans, completely blind to the cruelty of the man she chose to share her life with. Every bite I took tasted of bitter humiliation. I was no longer a father, a potential grandfather. I was a burden, a useless old man. As dessert was about to be served, I knew what I had to do. I stood up, my body stiff but my hand steady. "Excuse me," I said, my voice surprisingly calm. From the inside pocket of my jacket, I pulled out a small sheaf of folded papers. They were documents I had been carrying for weeks, waiting for the perfect moment, the moment when Lucy's joy was so great that my gift would be merely the cherry on top of her happiness. The irony was sickening. I looked directly into Mark's eyes, seeing a flicker of confusion in his expression. "It's a shame," I murmured, and then, with deliberate slowness, I began to tear the papers. The sound of ripping paper was the only noise in the apartment, a dry, final sound. I tore them into smaller and smaller pieces until they became the confetti of a shattered dream and let them fall onto my plate, covering the remains of my dinner. The silence that followed was heavy, dense, thick with unasked questions, I put on my coat, walked to the door, and without looking back said only, "Have a good night." As I closed the door behind me, I heard the scrape of a chair and my daughter's shocked voice calling my name, but I kept walking, the echo of my own actions ringing louder than any call. The silence of my apartment had never felt so oppressive. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant hum from the city outside, echoed in the void that had settled in my chest. The adrenaline that had guided me out of my daughter's home dissipated on the drive back, leaving behind a cold residue of pain and a terrible clarity. I had crossed a bridge, and now I was looking back at the shore where I had left the only person who truly mattered, with no idea if there was a way back. I sat in my worn leather armchair, the same one where I had so often rocked Lucy to sleep as a child, telling her stories of faraway kingdoms. Now, the only tale my mind could weave was one of betrayal and grief. The phone on the end table began to ring, its shrill sound cutting through the quiet like a knife. Lucy's name glowed on the screen. I let it ring, my heart pounding in time with the insistent call, once, twice, 3 times. On the 4th, I answered, but said nothing. "Dad? Dad, for God's sake, what was that?" Her voice was thick, broken by tears and confusion. "What were those papers? Mark and we pieced some of them together. It says something about a company's a transfer. Dad, what did you do?" Every word from her was a needle piercing my soul. I wanted to scream, to explain the offense, the contempt I felt, but the wound was so raw that the words refused to come. I was hurting her, I knew, but the pain her husband had inflicted on me needed to be exposed, and silence, in that moment, was my only weapon, my only shield. "Dad, please," she begged, her voice dissolving into a sob. I took a deep breath, the air scraping my throat. I closed my eyes and, with a tightness in my heart that stole my breath, I ended the call. I tossed the phone onto the sofa as if it burned my hand. What had I done? That company, Horizon Logistics, was my secret, my pride. After retiring from the civil service, I had felt a void, a sense that my productive days were over. So I started Smalls with a single van making local deliveries. Over 2 decades, with patience and the experience of a lifetime, I had transformed that small venture into a solid business, respected in the local industrial park. It was my legacy. It was Lucy's future, the guarantee that she would never have to depend on anyone, not even the husband life had given her. It was meant to be a surprise, an explosion of joy. Instead, it had turned to the ashes of conflict. The phone rang again, this time a different number. It was my sister, Helen. I hesitated. Helen and I had always been close, but she had a tendency to be swayed to believe the most dramatic version of events. I answered with a sense of foreboding. "Arthur, what happened?" Her voice wasn't one of sisterly concern. There was an accusatory tone to it. "Mark called me. The poor guy's beside himself. He said you had an episode in the middle of dinner, started ripping up important documents, and left without a word. He's worried you're not well, Arthur. Said you've been very forgetful, confused lately." The world spun. The speed. The calculated cruelty. He wasn't just defending himself. He was attacking me, undermining my credibility, painting me as a senile old man. The seed of doubt had been planted, and from my own sister's tone, I knew it was already beginning to sprout. Helen's voice, tinged with a pity that hurt more than anger, echoed in my silence long after I had hung up. He hadn't wasted any time. Mark, the architect of easy smiles and poisonous words, was already constructing a new narrative, one where I was the unstable old man, the fraying mind, and he was the victim, the concerned son-in-law. The cruelty of the plan was so precise, so surgical, it left me breathless. He wasn't just defending himself against my reaction. He was invalidating the reason behind it, erasing his own crime by painting me as mad. In the days that followed, my world shrank, confined to the four walls of my apartment. The phone, once a link to the world, became an object of dread. Lucy's calls stopped. Her silence was a scream that deafened me. Was she believing him? The doubt was a slow torture, a poison spreading through my veins with every passing hour. Other relatives called. My cousin Bernadette, with her syrupy voice that always preceded a wave of gossip, called under the pretext of checking on me. Arthur, dear, I heard about the incident, she said, the word incident, heavy with meaning. Poor Mark is so shaken. He said you just weren't yourself. If you need anything, a good doctor, perhaps. I hung up before she could finish. Every call was the same, a show of concern that barely disguised the morbid curiosity. I was the family's new drama, old Arthur who had finally lost his marbles. No one asked for my side of the story. No one asked what had driven me to that act. Mark's version, that of a compassionate man dealing with a senile father-in-law, was simpler, more comfortable to accept. I started replaying recent memories, looking at them through this new, terrible lens. I remembered a lunch a month ago. I couldn't recall the name of an actor from an old movie, getting forgetful in your old age. Huh, Arthur, Mark had said, with a wink at Lucy. At the time, it had seemed like a harmless joke. Now, I saw the malice behind it. He wasn't teasing, he was collecting evidence, building his case, brick by brick, in front of everyone, and I, in my naivety, had handed him the mortar. Isolation became my constant companion. Loneliness weighed on my shoulders like a lead coat. It was on a Tuesday morning, a week after the fateful dinner, that I decided I couldn't remain paralyzed. I needed a beacon of normalcy, a conversation untainted by Mark's narrative. I called Charles, my accountant and friend of over 30 years. "Arthur, what a pleasant surprise," he said, his deep, calm voice a balm to my frayed nerves. We talked about trivial things, the weather, his grandkids, the stock market. I felt human again, a person, not a problem to be discussed in whispers. Before hanging up, I hesitated. "Charles, a quick question. If someone wanted to assess the value of a logistics company, but only had fragments of documents, would that be possible?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "That's a specific question." "Arthur, it's possible. Yes. Difficult, imprecise. But a good consultant could work up an estimate." "Why do you ask?" My heart began to race. "Just curious," I lied. Charles's pause lingered. "Funny you should ask," he said slowly. "A colleague of mine, a business valuation expert, got a query just like that a couple of days ago. A young couple, very anxious. Seems the woman was set to inherit something from her father, but the old man, well, the old man tore up the papers right in front of them. The air fled my lungs. I felt dizzy. The phone slipping in my sweaty hand. They weren't just trying to understand what happened. They were scrambling, desperately trying to put a price on my legacy, even if it meant piecing together the shards of my shattered gift. Their greed was faster and stronger than any family bond I thought existed. Charles's revelation was a punch to the gut, knocking the little air I had left out of me. Their anxiety wasn't for me, for my mental health, or for our fractured relationship. It was for the bottom line, for the dollar value those scraps of paper represented. A bitter nausea rose in my throat. The image of Lucy and Mark sitting side by side, perhaps at the very table where I was humiliated, trying to glue together the fragments of my life's work, haunted me. They weren't trying to piece our family back together. They were trying to assemble the puzzle of their financial future. That knowledge changed everything. My pain, once an open, throbbing wound, began to harden, to crystallize into a cold, sharp resolve. If this was a game they wanted to play, then I needed to learn the rules quickly. My first instinct was to call Lucy, to confront her with this information, to demand an explanation. But what good would it do? She was under Mark's spell, and any accusation from me would only be further proof of my instability. I needed more than my word against his. I decided to leave my self-imposed exile. I put on my best suit, a dark charcoal grey that always gave me confidence, and drove downtown. Not to my company, not yet. I went to a quiet cafe, a place I used to go to read the paper and watch the world go by. I needed to think, to form a plan. Sitting by the window, an untouched cup of coffee in front of me, I watched the faces of people on the street, families strolling, couples holding hands, parents scolding children. Every interaction seemed a painful reminder of what I was losing. My own daughter was being poisoned against me, and I was here, alone, drinking bitter coffee. It was then that I saw something that made my heart stop. Across the street, in front of a glass and steel office building, was Mark's car, and leaving the building, shaking his hand with a professional smile, was a man I knew all too well, Mr. Peterson, a lawyer known in the city for his expertise in family law, but not for divorces. His reputation was built on darker cases, inheritance disputes, contested wills, and most chillingly, conservatorship proceedings due to mental incapacity. The air seemed to thicken. The buzz of the cafe faded away. I could read their lips from a distance, the formal words of parting. Mark got into his car with an air of satisfaction, of mission accomplished. He wasn't just spreading rumors among the family. He was moving pieces on a legal chessboard, building a fortress of lies to strip me not just of my reputation, but of my autonomy. He wanted control over Lucy, over my assets, over my very life. His greed had no limits. His cruelty was methodical, calculated. I felt a surge of fury so intense that my hands trembled, rattling the coffee cup in its saucer. My grief was giving way to something else, something more dangerous, the determination to fight back. He thought I was a useless, weak, and confused old man. He was about to find out what kind of strength can be found in the ruins. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in years, the number of an old friend from law school, a man who owed his career to a favor I had done him decades ago. "Anthony, it's Arthur. I need your help. I think my son-in-law is trying to destroy me." Anthony's voice on the other end of the line was like finding a safe harbor in a violent storm. He listened in silence, his professional calm absorbing my feverish, fragmented narrative. I told him everything, from Mark's cutting words at the door, to the desperate act of ripping up the documents, to the chilling encounter with Mr. Peterson. He didn't interrupt once. When I finished, a heavy silence settled between us, filled only by the sound of my own ragged breathing. "Arthur," he said finally, his voice deep and measured, "this is more serious than a simple family dispute. This is a calculated campaign. Mr. Peterson isn't a lawyer you hire out of concern. He's a weapon, and your son-in-law has aimed him directly at you." His words, though terrifying, brought a strange sense of validation. I wasn't exaggerating. I wasn't being paranoid. The threat was real, tangible, and approaching fast. "What do I do, Anthony?" I asked, my own voice sounding frail to my ears. "First, stay calm," he replied. "Panic is what he wants. He wants you to act erratically, to confirm the picture he's painting of you. From now on, every step you take must be deliberate. Document everything, every strange call, every conversation, and above all, do not speak to Lucy or him without my guidance." Following Anthony's advice became my lifeline. I channeled my pain into method. I started a detailed journal, noting the calls from relatives, their insidious questions, the concerns that were clearly fed by Mark's narrative. The second week after the incident became a social desert. Visits, even the most sporadic ones, ceased completely. When I ran into my cousin Bernadette at the supermarket, she averted her gaze and hurried down another aisle, as if my supposed instability were contagious. My reputation, a tapestry woven over 68 years with threads of integrity and kindness, was being unraveled, thread by whispered lies. The apartment, once my sanctuary, began to feel like a prison. The silence was a constant companion, broken only by my own thoughts, which spun in vicious circles of grief, anger, and fear. Lucy's absence was a physical ache, a constant pang in my chest. I saw her face everywhere, heard her laughter in the wind that whistled past the window. How could she believe him? How could she abandon me like this? On one particularly dark night, the loneliness became unbearable. I went to the bookshelf and pulled out an old photo album. The yellowed pages showed a smiling Lucy with pigtails and scraped knees. There was a photo of us at the park, her on my shoulders, her tiny hand gripping my head, her laughter echoing even in the silent image. The tears I had suppressed for so long finally came, silent and hot, staining my cheeks as I mourned not just the loss of my present, but the desecration of my past. It was that same night that I received a text message from an unknown number. "Be careful. He's planning something big. They're talking about a facility." The message was anonymous, cryptic, but its meaning was unmistakable. A facility. The word hung in the air, cold and menacing. Mark wouldn't be content with tarnishing my reputation or taking my money. He wanted to erase me, to remove me from the equation entirely by locking me away where my voice could no longer be heard. Fear, cold and paralyzing, seized me, but beneath the fear, a new layer of resolve formed. He would not lock me up. He would not silence me. I was not the weak old man he thought I was, and it was time to show him. The anonymous text, with its sinister warning, was the catalyst that turned my paralyzing fear into focused action. A facility. The word echoed in my mind, not as a distant possibility, but as an imminent fate I needed to avoid at all costs. I immediately called Anthony, my voice tense and low despite the late hour. He listened, asked a few brief questions, and then said with a seriousness that chilled my blood, "Arthur, I need you to meet me at my office tomorrow at 8 a.m. And do not discuss this with absolutely anyone. Assume that, from now on, every call you make could be monitored." The thought of being watched, of my privacy being invaded, was repugnant. But it fit perfectly into the web of manipulation Mark was weaving. He would leave nothing to chance. The next morning, Anthony's office felt like a war room. He had a grim look on his face. "I made some calls," he began, without preamble, pulled in some old favors. "What I found is disturbing. Your son-in-law, through Mr. Peterson, has made a preliminary inquiry with the County Health Board about an involuntary commitment for being an imminent danger." The room seemed to tilt. A danger to myself, I, who had built a life of routine and prudence. The audacity of the lie was suffocating. Can they do that? Just decide I'm a danger and lock me up? I asked, my voice trembling slightly. "It's not that simple, but it's not impossible either," Anthony explained. "They need testimony, a history of erratic behavior. They need a doctor's opinion, and that's where it gets really dangerous. Mark has been collecting evidence. The story of the torn papers, the calls he made to family describing you as confused and aggressive. Every one of those relatives could be called to testify. Without even realizing they're helping to build your cage." The scope of his plan was diabolical. He had turned family concern into a weapon, using blood ties to weave my shroud. And my Lucy, where was she in all this? And my daughter, Anthony, would she agree to this? The question came out as a pained whisper. Anthony hesitated, his expression softening with compassion. "Arthur, he's her husband. He has her trust. If he tells her he's doing this for your own good, that he's trying to protect you from yourself, it's possible she'll believe him. Desperate and frightened people can be convinced to do terrible things, especially if they think they're acting out of love." His silence was more eloquent than any words. He was telling me that my own daughter could be the key to my condemnation. It was in that moment that my distant cousin, Michael, called me. Michael was a quiet man, an accountant who had always stayed on the sidelines of family drama. "Cousin Arthur, "Sorry to call like this," he said, his voice low and urgent. "I've been hearing the stories going around. They didn't sit right with me. Mark never struck me as being on the level." I remained silent, waiting. "I did some quiet digging through my contacts in the financial sector," he continued. "Your son-in-law is drowning in debt, high-risk investments that went south. He owes a lot of money to people who aren't known for their patience. He needs a financial lifeline, and he needs it fast." The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place with a sickening thud. It wasn't just greed. It was desperation, a predatory desperation that led him to see me not as a father-in-law, but as a safe to be cracked. He needed my inheritance, and he needed it now. My instability was the crowbar he would use to force the lock. Michael's phone call, with its revelation about Mark's debts, was the missing piece that turned cruelty into logic, albeit a perverse and predatory logic. My image of my son-in-law shifted from that of a petty, disrespectful man to that of a cornered animal, willing to chew off its own leg to escape a trap. Only in this case, the leg was my life. Anthony confirmed my worst fears in a call on Friday afternoon. His voice was devoid of any emotion, which made it all the more frightening. "Arthur, my sources say they're fast-tracking it. They've submitted an emergency petition citing a rapid and significant deterioration of your mental health. A judge will review the case on Monday morning. We have, at best, 48 hours to prepare a counter-offensive." 48 hours. Time, which had dragged on in my silent apartment, suddenly took on a dizzying speed. Every tick of the clock on the wall was one less step. One more grain of sand falling through the hourglass of my fate. I felt the walls closing in. The legal battle Anthony was preparing seemed slow and bureaucratic against the speed of Mark's assault. He was going to succeed. He was going to lock me up, silence me, and then, with time and patience, plunder everything I had built. Saturday passed in a feverish blur, a mix of tense conversations with Anthony and long hours staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of my own daughter's betrayal. Then, on Sunday morning, the world stopped. Less than 24 hours to go. I was sitting at the kitchen table, trying to force down a cup of coffee, when the doorbell rang. The sound made me jump, my heart hammering against my ribs. I froze. Was it them? Had they come early? On trembling legs, I approached the door and looked through the peephole. And what I saw made my world tilt on its axis. It was Lucy, alone. Her appearance shocked me. The vibrant, lively woman I knew was gone. In her place was a fragile, hunched figure with deep, dark circles staining her pale face. Her shoulders were slumped, as if carrying an unbearable weight. I opened the door slowly. She looked up at me, and her eyes, the same eyes as my late wife, filled with tears that began to roll silently down her cheeks. She said nothing, just held out a manila envelope. I took it, my hands shaking as much as hers. I opened it and pulled out the papers. They were copies of emails, bank statements for accounts I didn't recognize, and a copy of the petition Mr. Peterson had submitted to the court. It was the proof of Mark's plan, detailed, cold, and meticulous. "Dad," she said finally, her voice a choked whisper, "I found this in his desk drawer last night. He was planning all of this against you." Her tears were falling freely now. She took a step forward, her body racked with suppressed sobs. "He lied to me. He said he was worried, that you weren't well. He used me, Dad. He used my love for you against you." I looked from the irrefutable evidence to my daughter's shattered face, and the rage that had been consuming me gave way to an overwhelming ache, not for myself, but for her. She was a victim too. He had deceived her, manipulated her into becoming a weapon against her own father. "I left him this morning, Dad," she whispered. "I'm filing for divorce." The shock of those words overrode everything else. She looked at me, her expression a mixture of shame and despair. "I can't live with someone capable of such cruelty." "But Dad, what were those papers you tore up?" Her words hung in the thick air of my apartment, freighted with the weight of 3 weeks of anguish, lies, and broken hearts. I'm filing for divorce. The statement was so simple, so definitive, and yet so monumental. Standing before me was not my tormentor's accomplice, but another victim, perhaps the greatest one of all. I looked at her devastated face, at the tears that traced paths of regret on her skin, and I felt the ice that had formed around my heart begin to thaw. My silent revenge, my plan to let them discover what they had lost, had struck the wrong target. It had wounded her, the one person in the world I most wanted to protect. I reached out and touched her arm, a hesitant gesture, the first physical contact between us since that terrible night. "Come in, honey. Let's have some coffee." She nodded, looking like a lost child who had finally found her way home. As I made the coffee, the familiar aroma filling the kitchen, she talked, her voice low and trembling, unloading the poison that had consumed her. She told me how Mark had convinced her of my decline, using small incidents of forgetfulness, twisting conversations, making her feel that agreeing to an evaluation was an act of love and concern. "He made it sound so logical, Dad," she said, staring at her clasped hands on the table. "He said you were suffering and didn't realize it, that your anger at dinner was a symptom, not a reaction. I so wanted to believe he cared." She told me her suspicion began with a trivial lie. Mark had told her he'd paid a bill she knew was still outstanding. It was a tiny crack in the facade of perfection he had built, but it was enough. She started paying attention, noticing his evasiveness, the secret phone calls. The night before, driven by an intuition she couldn't ignore, she waited for him to fall asleep and opened his desk drawer, the one he always kept locked. And there she found the abyss, the proof of his debt, the emails to Mr. Peterson where he openly discussed how to expedite the conservatorship process, the recordings. "He recorded you, Dad," she said, her voice cracking. "He recorded your conversations and edited them. He took pieces out of context to make you sound delirious. It was all in a folder on his computer labeled Project Legacy." The name was so cruel, so perversely ironic. It sent a chill down my spine. "And the papers I tore up?" I asked her gently, pushing a mug of hot coffee into her cold hands. She looked up at me, her eyes brimming with a fresh wave of pain. I asked him about them, right at the beginning. He said they were probably old, worthless insurance policies, and that the act of ripping them up was just more proof of your confusion. It was a perfect lie, plausible enough to quiet her curiosity and reinforce his narrative. In that moment, facing my broken daughter, I felt that justice had been served, but at a terrible price. The victory didn't have the sweet taste I had imagined. It tasted of the bitterness of her tears. "They weren't insurance policies, Lucy," I said, my voice steady for the first time that morning. "They were your future. They were the transfer documents for my company. It was my way of telling you that, no matter what, you would always be secure. It was meant to be a gift, not a weapon." The coffee mug trembled in her hands, the liquid sloshing into the saucer. Her expression shifted from shock to regret, to the crushing realization of the magnitude of what they had almost lost. Not just a business, but the truth of my devotion to her, a love that Mark had tried so desperately to corrupt and erase. The weight of my revelation settled on the kitchen table with more force than the coffee mug Lucy nearly dropped. The word company hung between us, laden with the meaning of 2 decades of my quiet work and the potential for a lifetime of security for her. I saw understanding bloom on her face, followed by a wave of shame so profound she looked away, unable to meet my eyes. "A company," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Dad, I had no idea. You never said anything." "That was the point, sweetheart," I replied softly. "It was never for show. It was always for you. My generosity, as you know, prefers the quiet." The ensuing silence was filled with everything that had gone unsaid for the past 3 weeks. Her regret was palpable, a cloud of pain that filled the small space. She stood and walked to the window, staring out at the street as if searching for answers in the city's indifferent motion. "How could I have been so blind?" she said, more to herself than to me. "All the signs were there. The way he treated you, the little barbs, his impatience, and I chose not to see. I chose peace over truth." "Don't blame yourself, Lucy," I said, coming to stand beside her. "He's a master manipulator. He built a reality for you, and you lived in it. The victim is never to blame for believing their tormentor." She turned to me, her eyes pleading for forgiveness. "But I doubted you, Dad." In the back of my mind, a part of me started to believe that maybe he was right. And that doubt will haunt me forever. Her confession was a knife in my chest, but it was also an act of courage. It was the unvarnished truth, and I knew we needed it to begin to heal. "The important thing is that you opened your eyes," I said. "You saw the truth for yourself. That's what matters now." In that moment, we decided together that the next step couldn't be taken in that kitchen, surrounded by the ghosts of what had happened. There was a place where the truth resided, not in words, but in brick and mortar, in spreadsheets and the constant hum of work. "Get your coat," I said. "There's something you need to see." I drove in silence to an industrial park, to a part of the city Lucy rarely visited. We pulled up in front of a modern, discreet warehouse building with a simple sign that read, "Horizon Logistics." She stared at the building, confusion mingling with awe on her face. "But this is it," I said simply. Using my key, I opened the door to the main office. Even on a Sunday, the place hummed with a quiet energy. Computers were in sleep mode, whiteboards covered in delivery routes and planning notes. It was a living organism, tangible proof of my secret life. I led her to my office, a simple, functional space with a large window overlooking the loading bay. I opened the safe in the wall, one she never knew existed, and took out a thick, leather-bound folder. "Here they are," I said, placing the folder on the polished desk. "Notarized copies of everything. The articles of incorporation, the annual balance sheets, the contracts, the truth, unedited." With trembling hands, Lucy opened the folder. As she leafed through the documents, I watched her expression change. Shock and regret gave way to an overwhelming astonishment. She wasn't just seeing numbers on a page. She was seeing the scale of my love and dedication, a legacy built in secret for her. "Dad, this is—" she began, her voice failing. "This is huge." "It's yours," I said. Or it was meant to be. His words that night, they changed everything. The look on Lucy's face as she absorbed the contents of that folder was a complex tapestry of emotions. There was awe at what I had built, a profound sorrow for what Mark's actions had nearly destroyed, and above all, a new, fragile seed of resolve. She closed the folder with a quiet reverence, as if handling a sacred artifact. "Dad, forgive me," she said, her voice clear and firm, stripped of the tremor that had accompanied it all morning. "Forgive me for doubting you, for letting him blind me. I was a fool." "It's in the past, sweetheart," I replied, feeling an immense relief as I saw the strength return to her eyes. "What matters is what we do now." She hugged me then, a tight, desperate embrace that held all the apologies words couldn't convey. I felt her sobs against my shoulder and held her back, feeling the fracture in our relationship begin to mend. It was a moment of catharsis, of silent forgiveness, the first step in rebuilding the bridges Mark had so methodically burned. We spent the rest of that Sunday in the office. I showed her everything. I explained the operations, walked her through the numbers, told her the stories behind some of our biggest clients. I saw a light ignite in her eyes, the same spark of curiosity and intelligence I'd seen in her since she was a child. She asked insightful questions, absorbing the information with a speed that filled me with pride. I was seeing in her not just my daughter, but a successor, a leader in the making. In the middle of the afternoon, my phone rang. It was Anthony. "Arthur, good news," he said, his voice thick with palpable relief. "The petition has been withdrawn. Mr. Peterson's office called mine an hour ago. Apparently, his client has decided to pursue another course of action." I looked over at Lucy, who was sketching a logistics flowchart on a whiteboard, completely engrossed. A smile formed on my lips. Mark's project legacy had imploded. Without Lucy's participation, his key witness and his moral justification, his case had crumbled. He was disarmed. In the days that followed, Lucy threw herself into the company. She arrived early, left late. She wanted to learn everything, from accounting to fleet management. It was as if she were trying to make up for lost time, to honor the legacy that had almost been denied her. Working alongside her was a gift. We rediscovered each other in that professional environment. I saw the strong, competent woman she had become, and she, I believe, saw in me not the useless old man of Mark's description, but a man who still had much to offer. Our relationship, now forged in the fire of adversity, became stronger than ever. However, the shadow of Mark still lingered. On Wednesday, he called me. His voice, once so full of smug self-assurance, was now a pathetic whine. "Arthur, please. I made a terrible mistake. I was desperate. The debts. I didn't know what to do. I love Lucy. Please, talk to her for me." His plea didn't move me. Where was this desperation when he was humiliating me? Where was his love for Lucy when he was manipulating her into betraying her own father? "Your actions have consequences, Mark," I said coldly. "And now you have to live with them." I hung up, putting an end to that conversation and that chapter of our lives. But I knew the consequences of his actions hadn't finished playing out yet. Mark's absence created a vacuum, but not one of grief. It was a welcome vacuum of silence, of peace, that allowed Lucy and me to focus on the task of rebuilding. She moved into the guest room in my apartment temporarily, a mutual decision that gave us time to heal without the loneliness we both dreaded. Our evenings, once spent in isolation, were now filled with simple dinners and conversations about the workday. We talked about suppliers, about the efficiency of delivery routes, about plans for expansion. Slowly, the company became the common ground where our trust could regrow, one route at a time. The outside world, however, did not forget so easily. News of Lucy's sudden divorce spread through the family like wildfire. Theories abounded, but the narrative Mark had built about my instability still had its believers. Some relatives, like my cousin Bernadette, saw Lucy's decision to stay with me as further proof of my manipulation of his fragile daughter. We received looks of pity, veiled whispers at family gatherings we felt obligated to attend. It was at one such gathering, a birthday lunch for my sister Helen, that the tension reached its breaking point. We were all gathered in the backyard, a scene of forced smiles and stilted conversation. Bernadette approached me, her face a mask of false sympathy. "Arthur, dear," she said, her voice loud enough for several others to hear. "We've all been so worried. First that episode, and now poor Lucy leaving her marriage. We just hope she's getting the help she needs. Being under so much influence." The implication was clear and venomous. Before I could respond, Lucy, who was standing beside me, took a step forward. Her posture was erect, her voice calm but threaded with a steel I had never heard before. The only influence I was under, cousin Bernadette, was that of a liar and a manipulator who tried to destroy my father for his own greed, she said, her gaze sweeping across the group that had fallen silent to listen. "My father is not unstable. He is the strongest, most honorable man I know. And as for help, yes, I'm getting it. I'm learning how to run a successful business he built from the ground up, while my ex-husband faces the consequences of trying to steal his own family's future." The silence that followed was absolute. Bernadette stood with her mouth agape, speechless for the first time in her life. I saw the shock on my relatives' faces, followed by a visible recalibration of their perceptions. Lucy's fierce, unequivocal defense, delivered with such confidence, was more powerful than any denial I could have offered. In that moment, she wasn't just defending my honor, she was reclaiming her own voice, her own truth. Later, in the car on the way home, she was quiet. "Are you okay?" I asked her. She turned to me, a small smile playing on her lips. "I feel light," she confessed. "I feel like, for the first time in years, I've taken a full breath." I realized then that her transformation was complete. She was no longer the woman who chose peace over truth. She was a woman who found her peace in the truth, however harsh it might be. Yet, as I watched the city lights stream past the window, a nagging worry persisted. Mark was a desperate man, and desperate men don't just disappear quietly. His public humiliation, courtesy of Lucy's declaration, might push him toward one last act of retaliation. The battle for my sanity was won, but I had a chilling feeling that the war for our peace was not yet over. My premonition about Mark proved to be terrifyingly accurate. His humiliation within the family was the trigger for his final act of desperation. About a week after the birthday lunch, I arrived at the office early in the morning to find chaos. Several of our delivery trucks had their tires slashed, and the words, "Crazy old man," were spray-painted across their sides. The vandalism was a low, petty blow, but its purpose was clear: to attack the heart of my legacy, my company, while simultaneously reinforcing the narrative he had created about me. The police were called, reports were filed, but I knew deep in my soul who was responsible. There was no proof, only the sickening pattern of his vengeance. However, his attack had the opposite effect of what he intended. Instead of intimidating us, it galvanized us. Lucy took command with remarkable efficiency. While I dealt with the police and insurance adjusters, she rerouted schedules, rented replacement vehicles, and personally contacted every client affected by the delay, explaining the situation with an honesty that earned their respect. But the true moment of reckoning, the emotional climax of this whole ordeal, didn't happen in the vandalized lot of our company. It happened 2 days later, in the most unexpected of places, the local supermarket. I was in the checkout line, thinking about my grocery list and the tasks for the next day, when I heard his voice, still haunting the aisles. "Arthur!" I turned, and there he was, Mark. He looked thinner, his clothes rumpled, his eyes bloodshot and ringed with a barely contained fury. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in days, consumed by his own poison. "I have nothing to say to you, Mark," I said, my voice low and steady, trying to turn back to the counter. "Oh, but I have something to say," he said, his voice rising, drawing the attention of the other people in line. "I want everyone here to know who you are. A manipulative old man who stole my wife, who turned her against me with your lies about money and companies." He was making a scene, trying to play the victim to the very end. People started to whisper, to glance over. I felt the heat of humiliation creep up my neck. "You destroyed your own life." "Mark," I replied, keeping my voice calm, refusing to be drawn into his hysteria, "with your greed and your lies." "Lies!" he shouted, his face contorting into a mask of rage. "You're the lie! A senile old man who should be locked up in a home, not running a business. You're useless, a burden." He spat the same words that had started this entire nightmare. But this time, something was different. The words still stung, but they didn't pierce me. They were no longer the verdict of a man whose opinion mattered. They were the desperate shrieks of a man who had lost everything. And then, something happened that I could never have predicted. An elderly woman, older than I, who was behind me in line, took a step forward. "Young man," she said, her voice frail but surprisingly strong, "I don't know who you are, but I know this man. Mr. Arthur helped pay for my husband's surgery last year when our insurance wouldn't cover it. He did it anonymously. A useless man doesn't do that. Before I could react, the young cashier, a kid no older than 20, added, "Mr. Arthur pays for a needy family's groceries in here every month. He asks us not to say anything." A third person, a man in a suit I recognized as the owner of the dry cleaner across the street, chimed in. "He gave me my first loan to start my business with no interest. He believed in me when no one else did." The supermarket checkout line, a place of everyday anonymity, had transformed into a court of character. My decades of quiet generosity, my well-kept secrets, were coming to the surface, one by one, weaving a shield of truth around me that none of Mark's lies could penetrate. He stood there, slack-jawed, his face shifting from rage to disbelief, and finally, to crushing defeat, as the world he had tried to poison against me rose up to defend me. The aftermath of the supermarket confrontation was surreal. Mark's shouted accusations had evaporated in the face of the spontaneous testimonies of my community. He stood there exposed and diminished, not by my defense, but by the truth of my actions over the years. The hate in his face gave way to a hollowness, the look of a man who finally understood that his power to destroy was gone. Without another word, he turned and scurried out of the store, leaving behind a stunned silence and a profound sense of poetic justice. I paid for my groceries in a daze, accepting the kind smiles and respectful nods from the people around me. My generosity had never sought recognition, but in that moment, its unexpected return was the most powerful validation I could have imagined. When I told Lucy what had happened, she cried, not from sadness, but from an overwhelming pride. "He tried to destroy your reputation, Dad," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "But he didn't realize your reputation isn't built on words, it's built on deeds, and you can't lie about deeds." That episode marked the true end of Mark's influence in our lives. With no credibility and facing legal consequences for the vandalism, the police found his fingerprints on a discarded spray can near the scene. He vanished. We heard later, through family gossip, that he had moved to another state, leaving behind a trail of debt and burned relationships. His departure was the sun breaking through the clouds after a long storm. With his shadow finally gone, Lucy and I could focus completely on the future. We decided, together, that it was time to formalize her position in the company. We went to the same notary's office where I had prepared the original documents, and this time, with no drama or secrets, I signed over 50% of Horizon Logistics to her name. The other half, I decided, would remain mine. "I'm not ready to retire just yet," I told her with a wink. "Besides, I need to make sure the new boss doesn't get into too much trouble." Working as partners became the most rewarding phase of my life. She brought a new energy, innovative ideas about technology and sustainability that modernized the company in ways I never would have considered. I, in turn, offered experience, the perspective tempered by decades of successes and failures. We were a formidable team, the perfect balance of past and future. Our family life blossomed as well. We reinstated the tradition of Thursday night dinner, not out of obligation, but out of a genuine desire to share our time. The conversations were no longer monologues about my past, but vibrant dialogues about our shared present and future. The relatives who had pulled away, seeing our success and evident happiness, slowly came around, offering sheepish apologies, which we accepted with grace. We learned that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, but choosing not to let the bitterness of the past poison the present. The apartment, once a prison of loneliness, became a home again, filled with laughter and the aroma of home-cooked meals. The wound left by Mark's words scarred over, leaving behind not a deformity, but a reminder of our resilience. I discovered that being useless is merely a matter of perspective, and that a man's true worth is measured not by what he owns, but by the good he does when no one is watching. Today, a year after that Thursday afternoon that nearly destroyed me, I look back and see the journey not as a series of wounds, but as a refining process. The fire of adversity, however painful, burned away my insecurities and left behind a core of strength I didn't know I possessed. My sensitivity to the words of others hasn't vanished entirely. It's part of who I am, but it is now tempered with the wisdom of experience. I have learned that the opinions of others are just that, opinions. My value is not determined by the contempt of one bitter man, but by the love in my daughter's eyes and the quiet respect of those whose lives I have touched without fanfare. Horizon Logistics is thriving under our joint leadership. Lucy has proven to be a natural leader, with a vision for the future that fills me with a profound admiration. She has implemented community outreach programs, offering training and jobs to disadvantaged youth, turning the company into not just a profitable business, but a force for good. My quiet generosity has found a powerful and eloquent voice in her. My life, which I feared was heading toward a lonely and irrelevant end, has found a new purpose. I'm no longer just the guardian of a legacy. I'm an active participant in its evolution. Mornings at the office are filled with stimulating debates, and afternoons with the satisfaction of seeing our plans come to fruition. My role has shifted. I am a mentor, a counselor, the anchor of experience that allows the